Longhorns, welcome back. So today we're talking about the nervous system, and the nervous system has probably the most important function out of all the nervous system. What it does is it tells the body how to respond to internal and external environments. And that should be a how, not a now. Neurons, there are three types of neurons. So neurons are just a type of specialized cell in the nervous system. So that's the first thing we're going to put. We're going to say it's a specialized nervous system cell. There's three types. The first are sensory. This one is where like your eyes and ears relay messages to the central nervous system. Now, I'm abbreviating central nervous system as CNS, just because I'm going to run out of room here. The second type are motor neurons. And what these are impulses, or like an electrical current kind of, that goes from the central nervous system to muscles. So like in order for me to bend my hand to pick up the pen, my brain is sending signals to my finger muscles. And then the last type are interneurons. And interneurons send commands to other neurons. And it can be other interneurons, it can be motor neurons or sensory neurons, it doesn't matter, it's just sending commands to other neurons. So in a neuron, it's a big cell. And it's kind of long, looks a little bit like a worm that like got smashed on one end. Or like if you, like when you crack an egg into a fry pan and then you add like a yarn tail to it, that's kind of what a neuron looks like. And we're going to identify or label a neuron in a minute. But two main parts of a neuron are the dendrites and axons. The dendrites receive that electrical signal or that impulse from other neurons. So referring to my egg and yarn tail picture in your head, the tail-like, I want to make sure I don't tell you wrong. Yeah, the tail-like part is the axon, and then the eggy part is going to be our dendrites. So the axon's the tail part, and the axon is the part that carries the instructions, the electrical signal, the impulse from the neuron to something else. So it carries impulses. Again, this is electrical signals, commands. So again, the axons carry these impulses to other cells, whether it's nerve cells, glands, muscles, your eye cells. Like it's all connected, but the axon is the part where the instructions from the brain go to the next cell. So a response to a stimulus, for example, we're going to say a tap on the shoulder. So tap on shoulder is going to be our example here. So the stimulus is the tap on the shoulder. The response is going to be what happens. So the first thing that happens is receptors in shoulder skin sense the tap. The next thing that happens is sensory neurons transmit or move the touch message to the brain. Once it's at the brain, the third step, the brain interprets I don't know if I spelled that right, but the brain interprets the message. It then decides how to respond and sends that message or the response to the neck muscles. The neck muscles are activated. Which means your head turns to your shoulder. So you can see who tapped you. Now, like I said, this is for a tap on the shoulder, but you can have any type of stimulus. So if you touch a hot stove or burn yourself, ladies, with your flat iron or your curling wands, A dog barks and you jump. Like any stimulus that's outside of your body, that's what happens. It's also the same type of stimulus or the same type of responses happen when it's inside your body. So if a white blood cell is just floating along and it comes across a virus, all of that stuff gets transmitted to the brain and your cells then know what to do. So I hope that makes sense. If not, come to office hours. We can explain that a little bit better. The central nervous system consists of two parts: the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain sits inside the skull, and the spinal cord sits inside the vertebral column, or your backbone is the other common word for it. The brain is where it processes info. There are three parts to the brain called the cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. The spinal cord links the brain to the rest of the body. And each person only has one brain, not multiple brains. The peripheral nervous system is mostly made out of sensory receptors or sensory neurons. They gather info transfer that information and they send it to the central nervous system. Motor neurons excuse me, transmit impulses from the central nervous system to muscles and glands. In the peripheral nervous system, you also have what's called the somatic nervous system. Somatic just means body. So with the peripheral nervous system, that's anything other than the brain and the spinal cord. Somatic nervous systems are going to be the same thing, but what they do specifically is regulate movement of skeletal muscles. Now remember, with skeletal muscles you have voluntary and involuntary. Most of the skeletal muscles are voluntary, but some of them aren't. And so the somatic nervous system controls the voluntary and involuntary ones. You also have the automatic nervous system. And that regulates activities that are not under conscious control. So conscious control just means that you think about it. So some examples would be like your reflexes, when you get scared, your fight or flight response. Those are all unconscious control of your body. Like you're not really thinking about it. It just kind of happens. And so that's due to the automatic nervous system. We have activities that are sympathetic underneath the automatic nervous system. So that's going to be your flight. So there's two types, sympathetic. And then parasympathetic. Oh, I forgot the P and the A. And so the parasympathetic automatic nervous system is what controls your body when you're asleep, when you're digesting. That's your rest and relaxation. Okay, remember you can always pause the videos. I do know that this is a bit long for this one, and so what I will say, the most important parts are going to be being able to identify neurons, dendrites, axons, how your body responds to a stimulus, the central nervous system, that it's made out of two parts, the brain and the spinal cord, and that the peripheral nervous system is every other nerve that is not in the brain or the spinal cord. Sorry, didn't know that was off camera. All right. So central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, all you gotta know. Peripheral nervous system, everything that's not the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? So moving on to labeling the photo of our brain. Number 1 is our cerebrum. It is the biggest section. It is actually this top layer right here. So the part that we all think about when we think about brains, that is actually the cerebrum. The brain is broken down into lobes of the cerebrum, but we're not going to get into that at this point. So this whole like normal brain looking thing, that's the cerebrum. For number 2, this part right here, that's kind of like in the black and pink area, that is the cerebellum. Number 3 is pointing to this little spot right here, which is the brain stem. And the brainstem is attached to the spinal cord. here is our nerve or our neuron. So number one, these like little tips right here, those are all dendrites. The green part right here is the nucleus. Remember that neurons are a type of cell, so all cells have a nucleus, or all eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. Number 3 is pointing to this orange section right here. That's the cell body. And I know it's weird because when we were talking about cells, we never really talked about like cells have a body, but neurons have a cell body part just because they are shaped so much differently than any other cells in our bodies. They are highly specialized. They cannot do anything other than being brain cells or nervous system cells. With the neuron, you have a protective coating on this small section. It's not really small, but all these yellow pieces here is a protective coating called the myelin sheath. And it helps to protect the axon from getting damaged. And the axon is going to be, let me see. I'm trying to go with the color I haven't used yet. So the axon is actually that whole thing. And then here at the end, these little squiggles that look like dendrites, but they're not because they're on the end of the axon. They are called axon terminals. So at this point, I want you to pause the video and attempt to do the nervous system assignment on your own. Based it off the notes that we put on Google Slides. Check with us if you need help during office hours, but do try to do this on your own because this part will be pretty important, okay? Alright, so in this first image here, it's these two parts. We have the central nervous system, and the peripheral. We have the brain and the spinal cord. And over here, we just have a bunch of nerves. Down here in our neuron, we're going to start with the center. This black ball is our nucleus. There are dendrites, which are at the front. We have the start of the axon right here that's covered in that myelin sheet. And then this part around the nucleus is the cell body. Now, this whole section here is called the cerebrum. Okay? But in a typical brain, there are 4 different parts to the cerebrum, and we call them lobes. So the first lobe that I'm gonna color for you is the frontal lobe. If I remember correctly off the top of my head, that's the one that's responsible for your decisions and your impulses. So if you make good decisions, you have a really well formed frontal lobe. And for most people, this is still forming up until, I believe, the age like 22, 21, something about there. We have the temporal lobe. And if you've ever heard of like your temple, don't hit somebody in the temple on their head because that's very dangerous. That is actually where this little section is located. So the temple on your head is in front of the temporal lobe. Over here we have the occipital lobe. And then the last lobe is the parietal. So on a typical brain, the parietal lobe is actually a small section. It's about that big. The occipital lobe is basically the back side of the brain. The temporal is fairly large. And then the frontal lobe is going to be the rest. On this image here, we also have the brain stem, which is this section right here. And we have the cerebellum. And again, that's this section right there. The function of the nervous system is to transmit electrical impulses between the brain and the ends of the nerves. If you put messages, signals, they all kind of mean the same thing. Feeling hot or running a fever would be a blank response to stimulation. So, is that inside or outside the body? Feeling hot, that's your temperature. That is internal. So that's an internal response to stimulation. The stimulation being you probably got sick or you were out in the sun for too long. Becoming scared from a loud sound is a response to an external stimulation because that is outside of the body. Remember, exit, external, has like the same first 3 letters. The brain and the spinal cord are part of the central nervous system. Motor neurons are activated in order to contract muscles and move parts of your body. Neurons don't touch. Instead, there's a gap. That's called a synapsis, where the signals are transferred. Axons carry signals away from the cell body and transfer them to the dendrites of another cell. And I know I missed one. I did that on purpose because off the top of my head, I don't remember. I believe that they're called sensory neurons. But let me just double check that. We're going to go with sensory nerves. Oh, no, it's just nerves. And if that's wrong, I'll write it in the description of this video. Okay. Again, come to our office hours every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. We miss you, Longhorns, and we can't wait to see y'all again. Stay safe out there.